It's beginning to feel a little fall-y outside, which means it's time for those warm, comforting dishes that we all love. And what is more comforting than a steaming bowl of shepherd's pie? Buttery mashed potatoes and a lamb mix that is absolutely filled with flavor. I'm gonna show you my favorite way to make shepherd's pie. For our lamb base, I want something that is rich, complex, and really well textured. My recipe uses more veggies than most, and that's for a reason. Cook time of the actual lamb mix is gonna be a little bit longer, and that allows for the veggies to break down into like this luscious coating for the lamb. It's insane. Quick note about lamb. Shepherd's pie would normally be made with lamb, and that's what I'm doing today. You can easily make it with beef instead. You could use ground beef instead of ground lamb. You end up with something less gamey, less sweet, less delicious in my opinion, but something still really, really good. My wife prefers it with beef, I prefer it with lamb. If you're gonna go beef, replace the stout beer with red wine and replace the lamb for beef, and you're gonna be all set. We're gonna start the vegetables by peeling 2 large carrots. I want to dice one of the carrots, so we've got some chunks of delicious carrot in the final dish, and then I wanna shred the other carrot. So that basically turns into this like mesh of dissolved carrots that give us that mouthfeel that we're going for. The shreds almost disappear while the dice leaves those discernible chunks of carrots in the final dish. I also like a little bit of celery in this too, but too much can be really overpowering. So about like 2 large celery sticks, 3 small celery sticks is right for me. Dice those into a small enough piece to cook down, but not completely dissolve. Think a little bit smaller than the carrot, but not quite shredded. I also like a small yellow onion diced in here as well. I want the dice really, really fine on these. Think of something that's gonna get really nice and deeply translucent and fall apart as the cook time goes on. If you've got really, really small onions, use a whole one. If you've got larger onions, use like half of one. These vegetables form the body of the sauce, and that gives us like a really, really beautiful texture as it cooks down. For the lamb, I like about 1 pound of it. This is like 70% meat, 30% fat on this lamb. It's pretty fatty, so I'm not gonna put any oil in the pan. I'm gonna use a large Dutch oven, and I want this over like medium-high heat, and I'm gonna add the lamb into it. The fat is gonna render, and we don't need any more. Break this up and let it cook until like deeply, deeply brown. And it takes longer than people realize. Give it the proper time that it needs. Probably like 15 minutes or so. Keep an eye on the temperature, keep it between somewhere around like medium high. And once the browning has really taken place, add in your carrots, celery, and onion, and let those like sweat down completely. This is gonna take a little bit of time. Again, add a few pinches of salt and continue stirring until they're soft, translucent, and have lost most of their water. This is gonna look like a lot, but as you cook the vegetables, they lose water. It's gonna shrink about by like half or so. Grate in 2 cloves of garlic and let those cook for like a minute or so. Don't let them burn, but just let the garlic smell really permeate the vegetable and lamb mix. Then we're gonna add 1 tablespoon of tomato paste, and that helps bring like a low base note of tomato without turning this into like a spaghetti sauce. With that, sprinkle in 1 tablespoon of all-purpose flour and mix those until you see like the flour and tomato start to stick to the bottom of the pan and create this like curtain of deep brown tomato flour mix. Once that starts to get like nice and dark on the bottom, crack open your stout or dark English ale and pour in 1/2 cup. You're gonna wanna begin scraping up all those crispy bits until the bottom's completely cleaned. If your heat is still on medium, this is gonna happen pretty fast. The flour is gonna begin to thicken and hydrate. So once you add your beer, add in 1.5 cups of water along with it. You're gonna want to scrape that bottom until all of the dark flour and tomato mix has completely been lifted up from the bottom. 2 cups of liquid in total is more than most recipes have, and that's on purpose. I wanna give this a little bit of time to simmer and reduce, and that's gonna make the meat more tender, and that's gonna let the vegetables fully break down. For seasoning, we're gonna stir in 1 teaspoon of chicken bouillon. This is that like better than bouillon paste. It's really nice, it's really salty. 1 tablespoon of ketchup, 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce, and 1 tablespoon of soy sauce. We're gonna also season it with some garlic powder, some onion powder, and honestly, any kind of dried herb, Italian herb mix, whatever you've got lying around that's dried, put that in now. The pot itself also needs like a ton of pepper. In my opinion, a lot of classic English cooking is really simply seasoned with like salt and pepper mainly. We're seasoning it with way more than that, but we want that pepper, like crispy brightness to come through. Let that come up to a simmer and turn the heat down to low. We're gonna let that bubble away and reduce for about 20 minutes or so. If it's reducing too fast, turn the heat down. If it's not reducing fast enough, turn the heat up a little bit. We're gonna use that time to make the potato topping. This is the buttery perfection that really makes this dish so comforting. Peel like 1.5 pounds of russet potatoes, maybe like 2 large, medium large potatoes, or really any kind of floury mashing potato. Cut these into chunks that are just small enough to cook quickly without absorbing too much water, but don't go too small or they'll fall apart while cooking. Get those into a pot of cool water and bring that up to a simmer. These usually need like 10 to 15 minutes of simmering, so keep an eye on them. Don't forget to salt the cooking liquid either. As the potatoes cook, continue stirring and reducing the lamb. We want that gravy to be really, really tight around the meat. It's gonna be quite thick and the seasoning needs to be spot on here. Give this a taste and add more salt and pepper as needed. Take this off the heat and let it cool as we finish the potatoes. This is also a good time to get your oven up to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Take a knife and test your potatoes for doneness. The knife should go in really easily, but let them simmer longer if they needed to. 10, 15, 20 minutes. It can vary greatly based on your stove temperature, how big your chunks are, and even just like how much water is in the pot. So keep an eye on it, test them for doneness. You'll know when they're done when the knife goes in really easy and comes out. Go ahead and drain them and leave them in the strainer. If you've got a fine strainer like I do, I've got the secret for perfectly fluffy and silky mashed potatoes. It's a little bit of work, but I simply use a spatula to push the potatoes through the sieve. I've done this before in the past with my shorter recipe. This sort of replicates a food mill or ricer. It leaves all the lumps behind while giving you a really, really smooth mash. You could usually just mash them if you've got a potato masher, if you want something a little bit chunkier, but this is definitely the method I prefer for a smooth mash. Also, be sure to use a pot that's way smaller than it should be. That really leaves you with a nice little mess on your counter to clean up. Now that your sieved potatoes are in the pot, add in 3 tablespoons of butter, and take note if you've got salted or unsalted butter. This is gonna dictate if you need to season it later on or not. Alongside the butter, mix in 3 tablespoons of sour cream and 3 tablespoons of half and half. All this dairy brings a lot of richness, so the sour cream is imperative to keep the balance in check. A little bit of acid tang in there is enough to go a really long way. Mix that until creamy and perfect, and then add in 1 egg yolk and a bunch of Pecorino cheese. Along with the acidity of the sour cream, Pecorino is a little bit sharper than Parmesan, almost like tangy and funky, and I think that really, really helps here as well. Grate in some pepper, and there we have our beautiful, silky, delicious, and light mashed potatoes ready to top our lamb mix. For that lamb, it should be cool enough to mix in about 3/4 of a cup of frozen English peas without immediately cooking them. At this point, I also like to add a tiny bit of chopped rosemary. It goes a long way, brings a lot of fragrance in just that kind of classic woody herbal note. I think rosemary in general is just really, really easy to overpower other things, especially the sweet, gentle gaminess of this lamb. Put your lamb into a baking dish, something like a cast iron or an actual casserole dish is really nice here, and then top it with your dolloped mashed potatoes. Use a spatula to kind of spread the potatoes out, and then use a little fork to bring some texture to the top. Those textured bits are gonna crisp up really nicely in our oven. Place that in the middle rack for about 30 minutes. This needs some time to cook. The egg yolk is gonna help our potatoes kind of lift and stay fluffy in the oven, and this is the perfect time to clean up your kitchen. We'll keep an eye on the oven as it goes, but 30 minutes in and our pie is bubbling. The top, however, isn't quite as brown as I like it, so what I do here is hit the broiler up to low and let it ride for a couple minutes. I usually move it to the top rack here and just keep an eye on how the color is developing in the potatoes. Any really dark bits are gonna taste a little burned, so just make sure it doesn't get too much color. Take it out of the oven once it's nice and brown, and now we've got the worst part, because this needs probably 20 to 30 minutes at least of cooling before we can chow down. This can be a great time for prepping a salad or just stealing some of the crispy brown bits from the top for a little cook snack. This shepherd's pie is extremely comforting, decadently rich, and in my opinion, surprisingly balanced. The lamb is a little sweet, a little gamey. The vegetables bring that like deep sweetness and richness. The stout also brings that kind of sweet richness. So we're leaning really far into this kind of sweet decadent angle. But then our mashed potatoes, they've got the pecorino, they've got the sour cream. They're kind of lifting us back into a really, really well-balanced dish. Everything in here comes into this beautiful balance that just absolutely tastes like fall. on the first cool day that you've got, you're gonna wanna make this and you're gonna wanna chow down. In the comments down below, I'd love to hear your thoughts on shepherd's pie and what your favorite kind of fall rainy day meal is. This is absolutely one of mine, but I've got some more coming in the next few weeks, so subscribe if you're interested. Thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate you being here. I also want to give a massive thank you and shout out to the amazing people supporting me on Patreon. If you're interested in supporting me directly, you can go to patreon.com/CameronMarty and check it out. As always, there's going to be the full written recipe on my website, CameronMarty.com. If you're interested in another cold weather recipe, you're going to want to check out these short ribs. They are going to blow your mind. Thank you again for being here. Cheers.